All right, let's get into another Q&A. So, thoughts on addressing hypothyroidism and easing off medication. So, first thing that I always say is thyroid medication barely works. Some people will claim that they've gotten more energy, whatever, but they still have a ton of problems, though. Doctors don't even ask, kind of what's going wrong, and they just prescribe thyroid medication based off TSH. And you have no idea what's happening with your thyroid off of one marker. You need like 9 different markers to figure out what is actually going on with your thyroid. But to me, like thyroid is extremely important, but it's still quite downstream. And when you look at it, thyroid usually gets impacted by cortisol, negatively impacted. So if cortisol is elevated, it's like the weapons are hot. So we need to, shut down the thyroid. I guess otherwise you'd spontaneously combust, trying to make it simple. So there's a lot of physiological checks and balances to make sure that the thyroid doesn't keep pumping out a bunch of T3, T4, burning through metabolism. So we look at it from a cortisol perspective as one. So we look at it from a stress perspective. Remember, stress is stress. It could be exercise, it could be an infection, it could be an environmental toxin, blue lights, etc. So we look at elevated levels of cortisol negatively impacting the thyroid. Well, why are we having elevated levels of cortisol? Why can we not manage the stressor? You know what I'm going to say? It's all going to come back to the mitochondria. And when you look at thyroid conversion happens a lot in the liver and the gut. So we look at liver and gut issues leading to thyroid issues. But even when you're checking the blood, if you've got all the thyroid markers that you need to check, you still could look okay because it's just checking what's in the blood. It's not checking what's actually like in the cell or anything like that. And so when we look at a marker that should be checked is reverse T3. So reverse T3 is just taking the T3 molecule, the active molecule, and swapping the iodine molecule. And it very closely resembles T3. So it will fit onto the receptor of the thyroid, but it's inactive. And so we tend to see this conversion of T3 to reverse T3 under high loads of stress. But you check the blood and it could say reverse T3 is fine, but that's because they're all bound to the membrane, bound to the receptor. And so that's why, once again, thyroid gets really tricky. So I don't overly obsess over thyroid. I go everything upstream, which just will affect the thyroid in a positive manner. And so repairing the membranes is a really big one. Phosphatidylcholine, essential fatty acids, evening primrose oils, lowering your threat, the whole shebang, circadian rhythms, sunlight, etc. Really focus on that mitochondrial health to improve the, stress management and the ability to create energy. Because if you can't create energy through the mitochondria, ATP, and if dopamine is struggling, think of that as your healthy stress response. You're going to use a lot more cortisol, which is going to negatively impact the thyroid more. And so I could go much more in depth on this, but it still all comes back to the mitochondria. And sure, you could use adaptogens in the short term. You could use things like ashwagandha, tyrosine, although that's not an adaptogen, but you can use adaptogens, rhodiola rosea, stuff like that to improve adrenal health, improve cortisol management, which will then improve thyroid. You can even look at one of my favorites is Thyroid Pro from Tonic C, I think it is. I just recommend it from Nutridyne. It has the glandular in it plus conversion nutrients. And so once again, acutely that can really help. A lot of women will claim or mention, sorry, that their hair improves, stuff like that. But once again, it's not that you're lacking a thyroid supplement. There are other underlying things that need to be addressed. So when it comes off the medications, like most of the time, the medication isn't doing much or just enough that you're not completely lethargic. And so like when coming off of it, you start healing. That's one, obviously, this is just educational purposes, disclaimer, consult your doctor. This is not medical advice, so on and so forth. Most people can just like cold turkey thyroid medication though. It's like taking T3 once again can really backfire on people because if reverse T3 is high, it's not binding to the receptor, you're just wasting your time. And so it all comes back down to that mitochondrial health, stress management, etc. Should you parasite cleanse without symptoms? Should we do it regularly as a society? So, and then there's another person asked, how do I know if I have parasites? So I'm going to clump them together. So on the note of how do I know if I have parasites, testing can be extremely inaccurate. There is one effective test though. You take your 2 fingers and you put it here or here. And if you have a pulse, you have parasites. Now, does that mean parasites are inherently bad? No, they actually play a big role in detoxing heavy metals from our body. They really help with modulating the immune system. It's when the load becomes too big or pathogenic or opportunistic. And so I've really changed my stance on parasites. I know y'all be like, oh, you were so obsessed with parasites or whatever. And yeah, there's a problem, right? Especially if you get diagnosed with Giardia, Cryptosporidium. I believe Blastocystis hominis is one of the more common ones in North America. Antonina histolytica is like one of the worst you could get. It's like taking a machete to your insides. those ones, yeah, you really got to focus on parasite protocols. But most of the time when I've put people in a parasite protocol, we've seen improvements. We've passed worms, mucoid plaque, etc. And I might have already mentioned this, but it didn't get them better. Like it helped, they obviously saw an improvement in symptoms, but it didn't complete the goal. And we had to go for so many more things. And I still treat parasites as they can be plugging you up. And I don't just mean constipation, like they can be blocking the gallbladder, congesting the liver, congesting your lymphatic system, especially the lymphatic system. So obviously still treat parasites. And so, yes, I think everyone should do a parasite cleanse, if you will, but I no longer recommend Cellcore. It's just no longer my go-to. I have a list. I just don't have it memorized right now of like this new stuff that I've been trying out that works really well. And the whole ivermectin. Ivermectin can be good too. But yeah, I think someone should, even if you did like a full moon protocol, which I totally believe in those, a full moon protocol once a quarter, something like that, even without symptoms, I think is a good idea. There's also like Biosyn LSF, which is a broad spectrum antimicrobial with some anti-parasitic mechanisms in there. And so a person could just do that once every 3 months or something, do like a bottle of that, 2 pumps under the tongue, twice per day or something. So you're always going to want some form of infectious support in, I believe. I know some people won't agree with me on that because if you correct everything else, which is theoretically true, if you restore redox and the immune system works as it should, you shouldn't have to worry. But a lot of us are going to have trouble being perfectionists. Or none of us are going to be able to achieve that. And so I do believe that we want some form of infectious support in periodically to help with just overall health and wellness and longevity and stuff. So yeah, should you do parasite cleanse without symptoms? Yeah, I think everyone should, but not to the extent that I was kind of like promoting it before, where I thought they were the end all be all. And not that I ever thought they were the end all be all. I just thought they were a major component, but now I'm like more viral seems to be more of the problem in terms of the infectious realm. Other than the environment is the biggest one. Anyways, going on a tangent as I always do. Yeah, you should do one even without symptoms. And then like, how do I know if I have parasites? There's a whole slew of symptoms and a lot of them cross over to many other things. Constipation can be a big one, but that also can be mold and hypoxia and vagus nerve problems. It could be hormonal problems, low DHT, including in females. So you can't really say that constipation is entirely parasitic related. Diarrhea does seem to be. Diarrhea and mucus could be very parasitic related, but there are more things that I'm diving into here where so your immune system will produce eosinophils to fight parasites, and eosinophils like a byproduct is mucus, histamine, things like that. But there is also the theory of that mucus can be produced in order to like fill holes. So it's like trying to patch up the gut lining. And so then when a person passes mucus in their bowel movements, it could be just a gut lining issue. Once again, could be driven by a parasite, but also maybe bacteria, maybe processed foods, right? So this is once again why I'm not like all parasites anymore, because there's so many other factors at play here. And when your environment is set up correctly and that redox is working, the exchange of electrons to make sure the body's doing what it's supposed to be doing, parasites are nowhere near as much of a problem as people think they are. But if you're in a very compromised state, yeah, they're probably going to be a problem. And so here's what I say: parasites, I already made my video on that. I don't believe there's such thing as a root cause. It's a whole slew of variables. And anyone trying to claim that a certain condition is caused by a certain infection or a certain instance, whatever, that's their, once again, it's just marketing. They're just trying to suck you in and sell you on their products and all this kind of stuff, right? But parasites, if they're there, that means there's so much more underlying it, because something else underlying created an optimal environment for a parasite to get in and thrive. And that is why it's like, yes, treat parasites, but then you literally have to go much more beyond that to figure out what created that optimal environment. Was it trauma? Was it mold? Probably the biggest things to lead to parasitic infections is trauma and mold. Mold just creates such an optimal environment for these critters to thrive. And then trauma, there's live off of trauma because of the immunosuppression and the change in neurotransmitters, and they eat up all your GABA and serotonin. So you have even more trouble processing that trauma, right? So trauma and mold are probably really big ones, but there are tons of reasons of why a person could have a parasite, or that parasitic load is just too high. And instead of having a symbiotic relationship, it now has this pathogenic function that is occurring. So yeah, parasites should still be treated. Most people have them. Lots of diarrhea is probably like a protozoa, like whether that's Giardia, Blastocystis hominis, whatever. But most people have like worms to some degrees, but not that they're debilitating or leading to like a ton of health issues. And once again, people be like, I know there's that big thing with multiple sclerosis. they found parasites. 100 out of 100 autopsies found parasites in the brain and the spinal cord. It's, well, yeah, what let them get in there, right? And so when you look at multiple sclerosis, it is very commonly associated with a viral infection because viruses love fat. So then viruses get into that myelin sheath, and the immune system is just trying to break apart that myelin sheath to get to that virus. So then we're seeing this change in the environment, and then the parasite's like, oh, sweet, somebody left the door open, right? And so then the parasites got in. So I don't think multiple sclerosis, a root cause is parasites. It's a contributing factor, but what let the parasite in? So anyways, yeah, I think everyone has parasites. How do we test for mold in our home? So ERMI test is a great place to start. Environmental Relative Moldiness Index. So it's a cloth test. You can just drop a DM me or drop a comment or whatever if anybody wants more information on that. Every home is going to have mold. And I believe if it's going to be your forever home, you would be ridiculous not to test it. You need to test for mold because every home is going to have mold. That doesn't mean it's going to harm you. And that's what an ERMI test is designed for, is to test, okay, is this mold at an alarming level that could contribute to my current health condition or eventually create a health condition? And so that's where an ERMI test comes in. And they're pretty affordable, and they're just a cloth, and you just wipe dusty areas. And now I also have like a protocol that you deep clean the home and let it sit for a couple weeks to really make sure that it's an accurate reading. Because I'll have people that, I remember one woman tested the home and she wiped the fan blade and the report came back pretty moldy. And I said, well, where'd you collect from? And she said, the fan blade. I said, well, when was the last time the fan blade was clean? And she's like, I don't know, it's very dusty. And I was like, okay, well, that's not an accurate reading, because if that dust has been sitting there forever, that mold could just really have collected. That doesn't mean that your home is producing a bunch of mold, kind of idea. So the deep clean process is probably the most effective, accurate. It tells you the species of molds and everything, and you can maybe figure out where it's coming from, but realistically, you have no idea where that mold could be coming from. So you have to hire a professional. Axiom Services Pro or something out of Kansas is the one that I always recommend people contacting to get more information on how to go about if they have found mold in their home from an ERMI test. But yeah, Environmental Relative Moldiness Index from Envirobiomics is the company. I don't have any discount codes or anything. I'm sure you can find something there. But yeah, that's probably the best one. Like I said, you could hire a professional to come in, moisture detectors, all sorts of things, a building biologist. Like there's a lot of people out there that could detect, but you got to be careful, because I think mold is one where, a lot of people get screwed over, and either A, they don't find someone good. Like I heard the mold dogs are pretty good. I just wonder if they get so distracted. Let's say they found a big portion of mold somewhere. If they go further than that and find more mold, I don't know. I'm not very experienced with them at all, but I saw they're pretty cool. So mold dogs could be a thing. Yeah, like when it comes to remediating the home, you have to be very careful who you hire. And that's why I highly recommend Axiom Services Pro or something like that. I'd have to figure it out if anyone's interested, but very reputable people, very supportive, and they'll help you find the right person if they're not in your area. Because a lot of times people remediate and the mold just comes back because the remediation was done improperly or things were missed and things like that. So that's a really big one. I see it all the time. Like people forget it, remediate their home, and then they just stay sick or get sick again. And they retest the home, and it's still a problem. So you got to be very careful who you hire. Blood work says everything's fine, but I'm sick. Why? So kind of like what I was mentioning with the thyroid panel, is blood work is just a snapshot of that very moment. Your blood is forever changing. Your biology is forever changing, day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. And when it comes to the blood is realistically always trying to achieve homeostasis, because if something got out of balance, it's going to try to correct it right away, where it's like, can be different on a cellular level. And so this is where blood work isn't the most effective. But with that being said, there's a huge difference between lab range and functional range. And for those that don't know, like I have blood chemistry training and certifications, and I go through blood work, also just with lots of mentors looking over blood work and things like that. So you can really pinpoint a lot of things. And the most common thing that I will see is CBC. And you'll see neutrophils are at like 40 something percent and lymphocytes are at 30 something percent. That's like a viral bacterial infection, so your immune system, that innate side, is becoming exhausted, because you want the neutrophils to be around like 70% on average, person dependent. And then you want lymphocytes to be around like 20%, like eosinophils. Okay. And here's a crazy thing too. I've seen many, many blood reports saying that 5% or higher is flagged with eosinophils, but then there's some blood reports that are like 7% or higher. But it is heavily known and very correlated with symptoms and testing that 5% eosinophils is a parasitic infection. So elevated eosinophils, elevated monocytes, even if they're not being flagged, could mean parasitic, basophils, things like that, right? So there's a huge difference between lab and functional. And this is why your doctor is saying you're fine when there probably is something there, or it's just not being picked up in the blood that day, or they're not running the right test. A lot of times they just don't run efficient tests. They run the bare minimum, and you can't figure anything out if you're missing a bunch of components. It's like running white blood cells, but not having the lymphocytes, the neutrophils, the basophils, the eosinophils, lymphocytes. Like it's ridiculous. Like if you have an elevated white blood cell count, you got to figure out what elevated blood cell it is so you can assess that way. And so just one, it's usually doctors are just not prescribing or recommending or whatever the correct blood work. Two, it's just a snapshot of that very moment. It's same with some stool tests and urine tests and stuff too. They're kind of the same. Like zonulin is a good example. Zonulin is an enzyme that will tear apart tight junctions, and it just might not have been high in that bowel movement. But most people that are doing a stool test that have problems probably have elevated levels of zonulin. So the body's like forever trying to achieve homeostasis, trying to achieve that balance. So that's why blood work is not the best way for identifying health problems. Not saying it can't be valuable. There's been many reports that I've witnessed that was like, oh, wow, that's exactly it. This is what we need to do, blah, blah, blah. Like CO2, for example, really discovering that there's mold because we're seeing hypoxia of the cell, things like that. So it can be extremely beneficial for sure, but it's definitely not the end all be all. No testing really is. No testing is perfect. And you have to be very careful with testing. It's like diagnosing somebody with something, saying, hey, you have this. You just took their vision from this to this now. So if you go and you do blood work and you see something show up elevated, well, you're like, oh, well, it's parasites now. And you ignore the fact that it's probably something else. Not saying that parasites don't need to be addressed, like I spoke about, but it's just, it can put the blinders on, unfortunately. And so you have to be very careful with testing. It's like stool and if you're talking about stool testing and everything, those are excretory tests. And when you're like under this cell danger response and you're stressed out and you're sick, your body is not excreting a lot of things. Everything's just getting recycled. And so this like, I see people showing their GI maps. They're like, oh, look how clean my GI map looks. And their beta glucuronidase is through the roof, which is an enzyme that causes you to recycle a lot of toxins and bacteria and everything. So it's just not picking this test up, or not picking these things up in this test. You have to be very careful. So when I recommend testing for people, I usually set it up where we try to mobilize a lot of things. Sometimes the people become ill for a short period, but that's okay because we're trying to mobilize toxins and infections so they actually come out in the urine or in the stool so we can get a more accurate reading. Plus, when you know how to read these tests, whether it's a GI map, total tox test, my favorite being an organic acid test, there are markers that you look at to see if this person is actually excreting things. And then if they're not, there are other markers that you can coincide to be like, okay, well, it doesn't say you have this, but you probably do have this, if that makes sense. So blood work is just not one that I am overly fond of in most cases. In Canada, it's free, so you might as well do it. But in the States, if you don't have it covered, unless you really need to check certain things like iron levels and stuff like that, I don't think blood work is the best tool for identifying an illness or helping you heal, kind of idea. And then last one, tell us more about that hydrogen machine and what kind of clients do you recommend it for? So I wonder if you're confusing the Vortex device that I posted, because I've never posted a hydrogen machine. I will talk about the hydrogen machine though, but the hydrogen machine is Axiom. Axiom 600 is the one you want. So that one produces the hydrogen. Axiom H2 HW 600 is the hydrogen machine. Very expensive. It's very expensive. Like before discount, it's $6,500 American. So I always just recommend the hydrogen tabs. And so you can get the rejuvenation ones. You can get H2 Elite. There's many hydrogen tabs out there. I think I made a post on hydrogen. Yeah, I did make a post on hydrogen, and you check that out. I'm wondering if maybe you are asking about the hydrogen machine. The way you worded it, I don't know if there's confusion that it was my Vortex device that spins the water to oxygenate it and structure it, or if I'm just taking it as if you do mean hydrogen machine though. So Axiom H2 HW 600, because they do claim that inhalation is more therapeutic than drinking the hydrogen water, and this machine will do that. But tons of people have tremendous success with the hydrogen tabs. Yeah. And then if you're referring, and they all said, what kind of clients you recommend for? if it's either the hydrogen machine or the vortex, literally every single human being on earth should be doing these things. Every single human being on earth. So that's who I recommend it for. Every single person. Sorry, I don't know if there was confusion there, or if I'm confused, but yeah, if you are asking about the hydrogen machine, Axiom H2 HW600. I believe one of my mentors, Justine, Justine, that's the discount code. I could be wrong. But the hydrogen tabs just work phenomenal. So I would just use those. Okay. That's all the questions for this week. Great questions as always. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'll see you in the next one.